The satellite phone crackled to life at 0347 hours, cutting through the ambient hum of our communications tent in Kandahar province. I'd been reviewing intelligence reports on Taliban supply routes when the distinctive ring told me this wasn't military business. Staff Sergeant Bennett speaking. Charlie, son, this is Sheriff Preston Cooley back in Millbrook County. I'm afraid I have some terrible news about your folks. My pen stopped moving across the report. The sheriff's voice carried that careful, practiced tone I recognized from my own briefings when delivering bad news to commanders. Professional distance wrapped around personal devastation. What happened? There was a fire at the farm last night. Started around midnight, by the time the volunteer department got there. He paused, clearing his throat. Your parents didn't make it out, son? I'm sorry. The words hit like incoming artillery. Everything else in the tent, the radio chatter, the generator's steady rumble, the rustle of maps, faded to white noise. I gripped the phone tighter. Fire investigation? Still ongoing, but Charlie, this wasn't an accident. Someone used accelerant. Military-grade stuff from what the state fire marshal can tell. Your daddy fought back. He had defensive wounds on his hands and arms before the smoke got him. I closed my eyes, seeing my father's weathered hands, the same ones that taught me to change oil and throw a curveball. The same hands that signed my enlistment papers with quiet pride. Who? Don't know yet. But son, there's something else. Found evidence someone was watching the place for days before it happened. Boot prints in the tree line, cigarette butts. This was planned. The tactical part of my mind kicked in, overlaying the emotional shock with analytical frameworks. Surveillance, accelerants, defensive wounds. This was an operation, not a crime of passion. I need to come home, Sheriff. Already spoke with your CO about compassionate leave. Your wheels up in 6 hours. After ending the call, I sat in the pre-dawn darkness of Afghanistan, processing the information like any other mission brief. Except this time, the targets had struck first. This time, it was personal. I pulled out my notebook and started writing. 30 men in the Devil's Apostles biker gang, according to the sheriff's brief mention. 72 hours of leave approved. Just over 2 hours per man. More than enough. The commercial flight from Ramstein to Charlotte felt like traveling through molasses. Every hour stretched into eternity while I ran scenarios in my head, cataloging what I knew and identifying gaps in intelligence. The businessman next to me tried making conversation somewhere over the Atlantic, but my responses were monosyllabic enough that he eventually gave up. By the time I reached Millbrook Regional Airport, 36 hours had elapsed since the phone call. Sheriff Cooley met me at the small terminal, his weathered face grave under his department hat. He looked older than I remembered, more lines around his eyes, gray threading through his mustache. Charlie. He gripped my hand with both of his. Damn sorry about this. Appreciate you meeting me, Sheriff. Can we go to the scene? He nodded, leading me to his patrol unit. Fair warning, son. It's not pretty. The drive through familiar countryside felt surreal. Same rolling hills, same tobacco fields, same weathered barns I'd grown up around. But everything looked different through the lens of what had happened, like viewing the world through a sniper scope, focused, calculating, searching for threats. The farm sat at the end of a half-mile gravel driveway, lined with oak trees my grandfather had planted in the 1950s. Only now, where the white farmhouse should have stood, there was nothing but a blackened foundation and the skeletal remains of what used to be home. I stood at the edge of the destruction, cataloging details. The fire had burned hot and fast, professional work. Accelerant patterns showed multiple ignition points, classic arson technique. The adjacent barn and outbuildings were untouched, confirming this was targeted, not random. State investigators finished their preliminary work yesterday, Sheriff Cooley said. Found traces of thermite mixture in the basement. Military stuff, like I told you. Anyone with that kind of access locally? Few veterans in the county, but nothing recent. Whoever did this either brought it from outside or had connections we don't know about yet. I walked the perimeter, noting sight lines and approach routes. The tree line Sheriff Cooley mentioned was perfect for surveillance, clear view of the house and driveway, multiple escape routes, far enough back to avoid casual detection. In what used to be my parents' bedroom, I found something the investigators had missed or dismissed. Partially melted in the corner was the brass frame of a family photo. Me in dress blues at graduation from advanced individual training, flanked by my parents. The photo itself was destroyed, but the frame's weight had protected a small corner showing my father's smile. I pocketed the fragment. Charlie. Sheriff Cooley's voice carried a warning. I know what you're thinking. I knew you when you were 10 years old, getting into scrapes with the Morrison boys. I also know what the Army taught you. But this is my jurisdiction, and we're going to handle this legal and proper. Of course, Sheriff. I mean it, son. These aren't Taliban fighters in some Afghan valley. This is home, and we have laws here. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You're next, soldier boy. I showed the screen to Sheriff Cooley. His jaw tightened as he read it. Guess they know you're back, he said. We need to get you somewhere safe while I... No. I pocketed the phone. Safe doesn't get me answers. Where would I find information about local motorcycle clubs? He studied my face for a long moment. Dottie's Diner on Main Street. Been the unofficial town bulletin board for 40 years. If there's gossip or information floating around, that's where it lands. And the Devil's Apostles? 30-some members, mostly centered around Edgar Aldrich, ex-military police, runs a tight organization. They've been suspected in various activities over the years, but nothing we could make stick. Smart, disciplined, careful. Where do they operate? Got a clubhouse outside town, plus they frequent Morrison's warehouse district for poker games and whatnot. But Charlie, these aren't the kind of men you want to approach directly. I looked back at the ruins of my childhood home. Sheriff, someone planned this for days, used military-grade accelerants, left my parents to suffer, then sent me a threat when I came home to bury them. I understand. With respect, I don't think you do. In Afghanistan, when someone targets civilians under our protection, we don't file reports and wait for bureaucracy. We neutralize the threat. Sheriff Cooley stepped closer, lowering his voice. Son, I fought in Vietnam. I know what war looks like, and I know what justice looks like. They're not the same thing. Promise me you'll keep me informed of whatever you're planning. I met his eyes. I'll keep you informed of anything that might affect public safety. It wasn't quite the promise he wanted, but it was all I could give. Dottie's Diner occupied a corner building on Main Street that looked like it hadn't changed since the Eisenhower administration. Red vinyl booths, black and white checkered floor, and the persistent aroma of coffee and bacon grease. The lunch crowd was winding down when I walked in, drawing curious glances from the locals. I chose a booth with clear sight lines to both entrances and the street, ordering coffee from a waitress whose name tag read, Christy. She looked about 30, auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, with intelligent green eyes that lingered on me a moment longer than necessary. You're Charlie Bennett, she said, not a question. Yes, ma'am. Heard you were back in town. I'm sorry about your folks. They were good people. Thank you. I'm trying to piece together what happened. Understand there might be some folks around town who could shed light on things. Christy glanced around the diner, then slid into the booth across from me. Depends what kind of light you're looking for. The kind that explains why someone would target a retired couple on a farm outside town. She was quiet for a moment, studying me. Your daddy made some enemies over the years. Not through anything bad, quite the opposite. He served on the county board of supervisors for 6 years, asked uncomfortable questions about budgets and contracts, made certain people nervous. What kind of people? The kind who drive expensive motorcycles and don't like attention from county officials. She lowered her voice. Edgar Aldrich and his boys have been running things their way for a long time. Your father was one of the few people willing to stand up to them. The diner's bell chimed as 3 men entered. Leather jackets, boots, the deliberate swagger of people accustomed to intimidating others. The largest one, probably 6'3" with graying temples and intelligent eyes, scanned the room like a predator evaluating territory. When his gaze reached our booth, it lingered. That's Edgar, Christy whispered. The one with him is Mario Booker, his lieutenant. Third guy is just muscle. Edgar approached our table with casual confidence. Ma'am, he nodded to Christy. And you must be the Bennett boy I've been hearing about. Staff Sergeant Bennett. Right. Military man. Edgar's smile was perfectly polite and completely empty. Sorry for your loss. Your parents were well known in the community. So I hear. Must be difficult coming back to such a tragedy. Lot of emotions. Lot of anger. Natural to want someone to blame. I leaned back in the booth, keeping my hands visible but ready. Not looking to blame anyone. Just looking for truth. Truth's a slippery thing sometimes. Memory plays tricks. People see what they want to see. Easy to get the wrong idea about situations. The subtext was clear. Back off, or there would be consequences. Edgar was testing me, establishing dominance through veiled threats wrapped in polite conversation. In my experience, I said, meeting his gaze, truth has a way of coming out eventually. Usually when you least expect it. Edgar's smile widened slightly. Indeed it does. Well, Sergeant, hope you find what you're looking for. Though I'd hate to see you have any accidents during your visit. Sometimes strangers who linger in small towns have unfortunate experiences. He nodded to Christy. Ma'am, always a pleasure. After they left, Christy let out a breath I didn't realize she'd been holding. You've got stones, I'll give you that. Most people don't talk to Edgar Aldrich like that. Most people haven't spent 8 years dealing with insurgents and warlords. He's just another bully with better clothes. Those better clothes come with better resources, Charlie. Edgar's got 30 men who'll do whatever he says, plus connections you probably can't imagine. What kind of connections? She glanced around again, then leaned closer. About 6 months ago, I was working a late shift when Edgar came in with an older man. Silver hair, expensive suit, scar running down his left cheek. They sat in the back booth for 2 hours, talking real quiet. But I heard enough. Such as? The older man was giving Edgar instructions about handling problems and cleaning up loose ends. Edgar, who I've never seen show respect to anyone, was practically taking notes. Called the man Sir and Mr. Donovan like he was reporting to a superior officer. Felipe Donovan. I filed the name away for later research. This Mr. Donovan say anything specific about my parents? Not directly. But he mentioned something about county board members who don't know when to keep their mouths shut, and how old problems require permanent solutions. The tactical picture was becoming clearer. Edgar Aldrich was the operational commander, but someone else was calling the shots. Someone with enough authority to command respect from a man like Edgar, and enough ruthlessness to order the elimination of elderly civilians. Christy, how long have you worked here? 4 years. Came back after college to help take care of my mother. You ever see Donovan before or since that meeting? Once, about 2 weeks before. She paused. 2 weeks before what happened to your folks. He drove through town in a black Mercedes with tinted windows. Didn't stop, just cruised Main Street like he was inspecting the place. Reconnaissance. Final planning. Confirming target patterns and escape routes. I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before answering. I kept my voice low and serious. Are you willing to help me find out who really did this? Because if you are, there might be some risk involved. She was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee cup. When she looked up, there was steel in her green eyes. Your father was the only person on that county board who ever stood up for regular folks like us. When the motorcycle club was pressuring local businesses for protection money, he tried to get the state police involved. When county contracts kept going to the same companies at inflated prices, he asked for investigations. And now he's gone, and nobody else on that board has the courage to ask hard questions. So yeah, Charlie, I'll help. What do you need? Information about their routines, meeting places, who's core membership versus hangers-on. Anything that might help me understand their organization. She nodded. The core group is about 8 men, including Edgar and Mario. They meet every Tuesday night at the old Morrison warehouse for poker and business. The rest are prospects and wannabes who show up for the image, but don't have access to real operations. What about their motorcycles? They keep them in a row behind Edgar's house on Elm Street. Treat those bikes like they're children. Custom paint jobs, chrome work, probably worth more than most people's cars. I smiled for the first time since receiving that phone call in Afghanistan. Christy, I think you just gave me an idea. As I stood to leave, she grabbed my wrist. Charlie, be careful. Edgar wasn't lying about strangers having accidents around here. And if this Donovan character is really pulling the strings, you might be dealing with more than just a motorcycle club. Noted. But here's something Edgar doesn't know about strangers like me. What's that? We specialize in turning other people's carefully planned operations into disasters. The sun was setting as I left the diner, casting long shadows across Main Street. Somewhere out there, 30 men thought they'd eliminated a problem by targeting my parents. What they'd actually done was activate a very different kind of problem. Time to begin their education. Edgar Aldrich's house sat on 2 acres at the end of Elm Street. a restored Victorian that probably cost more than most people in Millbrook County earned in 5 years. More importantly, it backed up to a wooded area that provided excellent concealment for nighttime operations. I'd spent the afternoon conducting reconnaissance, noting patrol patterns, lighting, and security measures. Edgar ran his organization with military precision, motion sensors at key approaches, regular perimeter checks by his men, even a basic communications protocol using handheld radios. But military precision meant predictable patterns, and predictable patterns created opportunities. At 0200 hours, I moved through the woods with equipment I'd acquired from a construction supply company in the next county over. Amazing what you could purchase legally if you knew the right technical terms and had cash. Thermite wasn't exactly military grade, but properly mixed aluminum powder and iron oxide would burn hot enough to turn steel into molten metal. The motorcycle row behind Edgar's house was exactly as Christie had described. 12 pristine bikes arranged with parade ground precision. Harley-Davidsons, Indians, a few custom builds that probably cost $30,000 each. These weren't just transportation, they were symbols of identity, power, and belonging. Taking them away would send a very clear message. I placed shaped charges of thermite mixture against the engine blocks of 11 bikes, leaving Edgar's distinctive flame-painted Harley untouched. That was important. He needed to understand this was personal, targeted, and that his leadership position made him a priority target. Each device was rigged with a simple timer fuse that would provide me 15 minutes to reach a safe observation position. From there, I could watch the fireworks and observe the response patterns. At 0217 hours, the first charge detonated. Thermite burns at over 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to cut through steel like a blowtorch through butter. The sound wasn't explosive like C4 or dynamite, more like a prolonged roar as metal turned to liquid fire. Within seconds, 11 motorcycles were transformed into blazing sculptures, sending pillars of white-hot flame into the night sky. I watched from the tree line as lights came on in Edgar's house and surrounding properties. Within minutes, men were streaming out of the building, some in underwear, others hastily pulling on clothes, all armed and agitated. Edgar himself appeared on the back porch, surveying the destruction with the calm professionalism of a military officer assessing battle damage. Interesting. While his men ran around shouting and pointing, Edgar stood perfectly still, analyzing the situation. His eyes swept the woods methodically, and I had the uncomfortable feeling he was looking directly at me despite the darkness and concealment. "Mario!" Edgar's voice cut through the chaos. "Get everyone back inside now, but the bikes are already gone. This was a message, not random vandalism. Move!" As his men reluctantly retreated, Edgar walked to his undamaged Harley and ran his hand along the fuel tank. He understood. Whoever did this could have destroyed his bike too, but chose not to. This was personal communication from one professional to another. My phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Sergeant Bennett. Edgar's voice was conversational, almost friendly. "Impressive work. Clean, efficient, targeted. You made your point. Did I?" "Oh, yes. You're telling me you can strike at will, that my security isn't as tight as I thought, and that you're willing to escalate this situation beyond what most people would consider reasonable." "That's correct." "Well, I have a message for you too. Sergeant, I took the liberty of having some of my boys pay a visit to that pretty waitress you were talking to earlier. Nothing permanent, you understand. Just a friendly conversation about the importance of discretion." My blood went cold. "If you've hurt her, she's fine. For now. But here's the thing about small-town warfare, Sergeant. There are no neutral civilians. Everyone's connected to everyone else. You strike at me, I strike at people you care about. That's how this game works. This isn't a game. No, it's not. Which is why I'm going to give you 12 hours to come to my office and surrender yourself for a civilized conversation about how to resolve this situation. If you don't show up, Miss Dunar is going to have a very unpleasant experience. And if I do show up? Then we discuss this like reasonable men. Maybe we can come to an understanding that prevents further complications." The line went dead. I sat in the darkness, processing this development. Edgar had just demonstrated something I should have anticipated. He was willing to target non-combatants to achieve tactical advantage. In Afghanistan, we called that a war crime. Here, it was apparently just business. But threatening Christie also revealed something about Edgar's operational limitations. He was reacting rather than proacting, responding to my moves instead of implementing his own strategic plan. That suggested he was following orders from someone else, probably this Donovan character. More importantly, he was giving me 12 hours instead of acting immediately. That meant he needed time to coordinate with his superior, get authorization for his next moves, time I could use to my advantage. My phone buzzed with a text message, 5 a.m., Old Methodist Church on County Road 15. Come alone, and she lives. Bring friends, and she doesn't. I smiled grimly in the darkness. Edgar was making the classic mistake of underestimating his opponent. He thought he was dealing with a grief-stricken civilian who would surrender to protect an innocent bystander. What he was actually dealing with was someone who'd spent 8 years learning how to turn enemy tactical advantages into catastrophic disadvantages. The education was about to continue. The abandoned Methodist Church on County Road 15 had been empty for a decade, victim of declining rural congregation and deferred maintenance. White clapboard siding gray with weather, broken windows, and weeds growing through cracks in the foundation. Perfect place for a clandestine meeting. Isolated, multiple exit routes, and far enough from town that gunfire wouldn't draw immediate attention. I arrived at 0430 hours, 30 minutes early, using the time to conduct surveillance and identify potential threats. Edgar's black Suburban was parked beside the church, along with 2 motorcycles, probably Mario and another core member providing security. No sign of Christy, which meant she was either inside or being held elsewhere as insurance. At 0459 hours, I walked up the gravel path to the church's front entrance, hands visible but ready. The door was unlocked. Punctual, Edgar said from behind the altar. I appreciate that in a man. The church interior was exactly what I'd expected. Dusty pews, broken stained glass casting colored shadows, and the musty smell of abandonment. Edgar stood casually beside what used to be the pulpit, while Mario flanked the side entrance with an AR-15 at low ready. But there was a third person present I hadn't anticipated. An older man in an expensive suit sat in the front pew, silver hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. The scar Christie had described ran from his left temple to his jawline, probably from a knife fight decades ago. This had to be Felipe Donovan, the man pulling Edgar's strings. Mr. Donovan, I presume. Indeed. His voice carried the cultured accent of someone who'd spent considerable time and money erasing his original background. I've been looking forward to meeting you, Sergeant Bennett. Your father caused me a great deal of trouble over the years. Trouble? Questions, investigations, inconvenient curiosity about county contracts and budget allocations. Do you know why I spent 20 years in federal prison, Sergeant? I waited. Embezzlement. Your father noticed discrepancies in construction budgets during his time on the county board. Instead of accepting a reasonable explanation and moving on, he insisted on bringing in state auditors. Cost me 2 decades of my life. The tactical picture snapped into focus. This wasn't just about motorcycle club business or protection rackets. This was personal revenge against my father, executed by proxy through Edgar's organization. So you decided to eliminate him. I decided to eliminate the entire Bennett family line. Your parents were merely the beginning. Edgar shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Donovan, the plan was to make it look like an accident. Plans change, Donovan cut him off. When the boy came home and started asking questions, the situation required adaptation, which is why we're here. Where's Christy? Safe, for the moment. Whether she remains that way depends entirely on your cooperation, Sergeant. I have a proposition. I'm listening. Donovan stood, straightening his suit jacket. You're going to walk out of this church and leave Millbrook County. Tonight. You'll return to your military duties and never speak about what happened here. In exchange, Miss Dunnar lives, and no further action will be taken against you or anyone you care about. And if I refuse, then you'll join your parents, and Miss Dunnar will discover that small-town hospitality has its limits. Edgar's men can be quite creative when properly motivated. I looked around the church, cataloging positions and distances. Mario was 12 feet away with a rifle. Edgar was armed but trying to look casual, and Donovan appeared unarmed. Standard intimidation setup. Overwhelming force to encourage compliance. What they didn't know was that I'd spent the last 3 hours preparing for exactly this scenario. Mr. Donovan, before I give you an answer, I'm curious about something. What's that? How many people have you eliminated over the years? Besides my parents, I mean. His smile was genuinely pleased, like a craftsman being asked about his work. 3 others who couldn't mind their own business. A county inspector who asked too many questions about foundation work in 1987. A contractor who threatened to go to the FBI in 1989. A reporter who was getting too close to the truth in 1991. What happened to the bodies? Poured into the foundation of the new county building during construction. Amazing what you can hide in concrete if you have the right connections with the construction crew. Edgar was staring at Donovan with horror. You never told me about any of this. Need to know basis, Donovan replied, and you didn't need to know until now. I nodded thoughtfully. That's helpful information. Thank you. For what? For the confession. At that moment, the shaped charge I'd attached to Donovan's Mercedes exploded in the parking lot. Nothing dramatic, just enough to disable the vehicle and create a distraction. Mario spun toward the sound, Edgar drew his sidearm, and Donovan stumbled backward in surprise. I used those 2 seconds of confusion to close the distance to Mario, disarming him with a technique they'd never taught in motorcycle maintenance school. By the time Edgar had his weapon fully drawn, Mario's AR-15 was pointed at his chest. Drop it. Edgar hesitated, calculating odds. Smart man. He could see the tactical situation had shifted completely in my favor. Edgar, don't make this worse than it has to be. He lowered his pistol and set it on the pew beside him. Very good. I kept the rifle trained on both men while addressing Donovan. Now, about those bodies in the foundation. That's going to be very useful information for the FBI. You're bluffing. You have no proof. Actually, I have your recorded confession. Amazing what modern technology can do. I tapped my shirt pocket. Plus, I'm betting a forensic examination of that foundation will turn up some interesting evidence. Donovan's composure cracked for the first time. You can't prove anything. Maybe not. But I can create enough questions to justify a federal investigation. And federal investigations have a way of uncovering all sorts of interesting connections. Financial records, communication logs, witness testimonies. Edgar was looking back and forth between us. Mr. Donovan, is he telling the truth? Are there actually bodies buried in the county building? That's not important right now. It's very important, I interrupted, because it means this isn't just about motorcycle club business anymore. This is about federal conspiracy charges, RICO violations, and accessory to felony counts. Edgar, you're looking at life in prison if you continue following this man's orders. The church was quiet, except for the distant sound of sirens approaching. I'd made an anonymous call to 911 about suspicious activity and gunfire, time to arrive just about now. Those are your choices, I told Edgar. Continue working for a man who just confessed to 3 additional homicides, or start cooperating with the investigation that's about to begin. Edgar holstered his weapon completely. Mario, stand down. But Edgar, I said stand down. We're done here. Donovan was backing toward the altar. This isn't over, Sergeant. You have no idea what you're interfering with. Actually, I think I understand perfectly. You're a failed criminal who spent 20 years in prison, came back to town looking for revenge, and recruited Edgar's organization to do your dirty work. Now you're panicking because someone finally called your bluff. My phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at the screen without taking my eyes off the 3 men. Christie's safe. Found her tied up at Morrison Warehouse. Deputies en route to your location. Sheriff Cooley. Gentlemen, it appears the situation has changed again. Edgar, I suggest you and Mario leave now before the sheriff arrives and starts asking uncomfortable questions about why you're here with Mr. Donovan. Edgar nodded curtly. Understood. As they walked past me toward the door, Edgar paused. Sergeant, for what it's worth, I didn't know about the other people. The original plan was supposed to be clean and quick. I believe you, which is why you might want to consider who you're really working for. After they left, I zip-tied Donovan's hands behind his back and sat him in the front pew to wait for Sheriff Cooley. The sirens were getting louder, and I could see red and blue lights through the broken windows. This won't hold up in court, Donovan said. Coerced confession, illegal recording, no warrant? Maybe. But it'll be enough to start the investigation. And once that begins, I think you'll be surprised how many people start remembering things they thought they'd forgotten. Sheriff Cooley's voice came from outside. Charlie, you in there? All clear, Sheriff. I've got someone here who wants to discuss those old construction contracts with you. As I heard footsteps on the gravel path, my phone buzzed again. Another text from an unknown number. Warehouse, 5 a.m. tomorrow. Final offer. Edgar wasn't giving up. This was escalating exactly as I'd expected, and exactly as I'd planned. By tomorrow morning, this would all be over, one way or another. The question was, how many of them would still be standing when the dust settled? Millbrook County Hospital was a small, practical building that served a rural population with limited resources, but considerable heart. I found Christy in the emergency department, sitting on an examination table, while a doctor checked her wrists for ligature marks. "How bad?" I asked Sheriff Cooley. "Could have been worse. They grabbed her after her shift last night, kept her tied up in a storage room at Morrison's warehouse, scared her pretty good, but no permanent damage." "Did she see who was responsible?" "Mario and 2 others she didn't recognize. They wanted information about what she'd told you at the diner." I approached the examination table carefully. Christy looked up at me with tired eyes that still held their green fire, but now it was tempered with the realization of how dangerous this situation had become. "I'm sorry," I said. "This is my fault." "No." Her voice was firm. "This is Felipe Donovan's fault. Edgar told me some things while I was being held, things I don't think he meant to say." "Such as?" "Donovan's been planning this for months, Charlie. Not just targeting your parents, but you specifically. He researched your military service, your deployment schedule, even your leave policies. He wanted you to come home for the funeral so he could eliminate the entire Bennett family at once." Sheriff Cooley stepped closer. "What else did Edgar say? That he never signed up for targeting civilians or getting involved in 20-year-old cases. He's starting to realize Donovan's been using his organization for personal vendettas that have nothing to do with their normal business." "That matches what I observed at the church." I told them about the confrontation, Donovan's confession, and Edgar's obvious discomfort with the escalating situation. "So what happens now?" Christy asked. Sheriff Cooley pulled out his notebook. "Now I contact the FBI about potential federal crimes, request excavation permits for the county building foundation, and start building a case against Donovan." "How long will that take?" "Weeks, maybe months. Federal bureaucracy moves slowly, even with clear evidence." My phone buzzed with the text I'd been expecting. "Final offer. Morrison Warehouse, 5 a.m. Come alone, or everyone you care about pays the price." I showed the message to Sheriff Cooley. "Edgar's forcing the issue. He wants to resolve this before federal investigators get involved. You're not seriously considering going?" "Actually, I am, but not the way he expects." "Charlie." "Sheriff, with respect, this ends tomorrow morning one way or another. Either I end it on my terms or Edgar ends it on his terms. Those are the only options left." Christy grabbed my hand. "There has to be another way." "Not anymore. Donovan escalated this beyond the point where legal solutions can work fast enough. Every hour we wait gives him more time to cover tracks, eliminate witnesses, and plan his next move." "So what's your plan?" I looked at both of them, weighing how much to share. "Asymmetric warfare. Edgar's expecting a straight confrontation, lone gunman walking into a trap. Instead, he's going to get a lesson in why small unit tactics beat numerical superiority when properly applied." Sheriff Cooley closed his notebook. "I can't officially sanction vigilante action." "I understand. But I can't prevent a concerned citizen from defending himself against criminal threats, either." "Understood. And if someone happened to leave detailed information about building layouts, security measures, and tactical considerations where I might find them, I suppose that wouldn't be illegal." I smiled. "I'll take that under advisement, Sheriff." As we prepared to leave the hospital, Christy pulled me aside. "Charlie, promise me something." "What?" "Promise me you'll come back. Not for justice or revenge or any of that. Just come back." I looked into her green eyes and saw something I hadn't expected. Someone who cared about Charlie Bennett, the person. Not Charlie Bennett, the soldier seeking vengeance. Someone worth surviving for. "I promise." The sun was setting as we left the hospital, casting long shadows across the parking lot. In 12 hours, this would all be over. Edgar and his remaining loyalists would make their stand at Morrison's warehouse, expecting to overwhelm a single opponent through superior numbers and prepared positions. What they'd get instead was a demonstration of why conventional tactics fail against unconventional warfare. Time to finish this. Morrison's warehouse complex occupied 12 acres on the industrial side of Millbrook County, a collection of corrugated steel buildings that had served various businesses over the decades. Currently, it housed agricultural equipment, construction supplies, and, according to local gossip, Edgar Aldrich's weekly poker games. At 0300 hours, I conducted final reconnaissance from the wooded area north of the complex. Edgar had positioned his forces exactly as I'd anticipated. Sniper overwatch from the water tower, perimeter guards at key approaches, and the main force concentrated in the central warehouse building. Classic defensive positioning designed to funnel an attacker into predetermined engagement zones. Textbook military tactics, which made them predictable. I'd spent the previous evening acquiring additional materials and preparing the battlefield. Amazing what you could accomplish with basic construction supplies, a few chemistry lessons, and detailed knowledge of structural engineering. The warehouse complex was about to become a very dangerous place for anyone who didn't understand its new configuration. At 0430 hours, I sent Edgar a text. Running late. Be there in 30 minutes. His response was immediate. Clock's ticking, Sergeant. Every minute you delay costs someone you care about. Empty threat. Christie was safe under Sheriff Cooley's protection, and Edgar didn't have time to acquire new leverage. He was committed to this location and timeline, which meant he'd lost tactical flexibility. At 0445 hours, I initiated the operation. The shaped charges I'd placed against the water tower support legs detonated simultaneously, bringing down Edgar's overwatch position in a controlled collapse that sent his sniper tumbling 40 feet into the equipment yard. Not lethal, but definitely mission-ending. The explosions also served as the signal for Phase 2. Pre-positioned charges at the warehouse complex's electrical junction box eliminated all lighting, plunging the area into darkness, broken only by emergency battery units and vehicle headlights. Edgar's men began shouting, trying to re-establish communication and coordination as their carefully planned defensive positions became chaos. I used the confusion to approach the main warehouse from the south, moving through shadows created by their own vehicle positioning. The loading dock was exactly where building plans indicated it would be, and the structural modifications I'd made during my earlier visit were still in place. "Contact south!" someone shouted as I triggered the Claymore-style directional charge I'd rigged against the loading dock entrance. Not an actual military Claymore, those were difficult to acquire legally, but ball bearings and explosive compound in a steel housing produced similar results. The loading dock door disintegrated in a shower of metal fragments, creating a dramatic breach point, but I wasn't coming through the loading dock. While Edgar's remaining men concentrated fire on the destroyed entrance, I entered through the roof access hatch I'd unlocked during reconnaissance. Warehouse buildings were notoriously vulnerable from above. Industrial skylights provided multiple entry points for anyone willing to rappel down climbing rope. Inside, I could see muzzle flashes as 8 men maintained suppressive fire on the loading dock, waiting for an assault that would never come. Their positions were illuminated by their own weapons discharge, making them perfect targets for someone with elevation advantage and night vision equipment. I could have eliminated all of them within 90 seconds. Instead, I activated the final phase of the operation. The warehouse's sprinkler system had been modified with materials that would create dense, choking smoke when activated by the fire suppression sensors. Not toxic, but thick enough to eliminate visibility and force evacuation. Within minutes, Edgar's men were stumbling toward exits, coughing and gasping, their tactical coordination completely destroyed. As they emerged from the building, I was waiting. Weapons on the ground. Now. Most complied immediately. 2 tried to maintain fighting positions until they realized I had clear sight lines from elevated concealment while they were silhouetted against the warehouse lights. Military training creates habits that are hard to break, and the habit of surviving overwhelming odds was stronger than loyalty to Edgar Aldrich. "Where's Edgar?" "Back entrance," one of them gasped. "With the old man." I found them beside a black Mercedes that hadn't been there during my reconnaissance. Felipe Donovan was attempting to load boxes of documents into the trunk, while Edgar provided security. Both men looked up as I approached, Edgar raising his sidearm in a 2-handed combat stance. "Sergeant Bennett, I have to admit that was impressive work. You neutralized 8 trained men without firing a shot." Training and preparation usually beat raw numbers. Indeed. Which is why I'm disappointed this has to end the way it does. Donovan slammed the trunk closed. "Edgar, we don't have time for conversation. Eliminate him and let's go." "Actually," Edgar said, lowering his weapon slightly, "I think we need to discuss what happens next, Mr. Donovan, what do you mean?" "I mean you lied to me about the scope of this operation. Bodies and foundations, 20-year-old revenge schemes, Federal conspiracy charges. None of that was part of our original agreement. Donovan's face flushed with anger. Our agreement was that you would follow orders and ask minimal questions. Nothing has changed. Everything has changed. You've turned my organization into accessories to felony charges that could put us all away for life. That wasn't the deal. I watched the exchange with professional interest. Edgar was realizing what I'd hoped he'd realize, that Donovan had been using him as a disposable asset in a personal vendetta. Smart commanders know when to cut their losses. Edgar, I said quietly, you still have a choice here. Walk away now, cooperate with the federal investigation, and maybe you can salvage something from this situation. He's right, Edgar told Donovan. This ends here. Donovan reached inside his jacket, probably for a concealed weapon. Edgar saw the movement and started to react, but he was a half-second too slow. I put 2 rounds center mass into Felipe Donovan before his pistol cleared leather. The man who'd orchestrated my parents' elimination confessed to 3 additional homicides and threatened everyone I cared about dropped beside his Mercedes without firing a shot. Sometimes justice was swift and efficient. Edgar stared at Donovan's body, then at me. Thank you. For what? For ending it the right way. I was about to do the same thing, but this is cleaner. Self-defense, protection of civilians, elimination of a clear and present danger. In the distance, sirens were approaching. Sheriff Cooley's response time was excellent, as always. Edgar, you need to decide what happens next. You can try to fight this out with local law enforcement, or you can start cooperating with the federal investigation that's going to happen regardless. He holstered his sidearm completely. My boys and I will surrender to Sheriff Cooley. We'll cooperate fully with whatever investigation follows. What about the organization? What organization? As of tonight, the Devil's Apostles are disbanded. Anybody who wants to continue down this path can do it without me. The first patrol units were entering the warehouse complex, red and blue lights cutting through the smoke and darkness. Edgar raised his hands above his head as they approached. Sheriff Cooley, he called out, this is Edgar Aldrich. My men and I are surrendering voluntarily. The situation is under control. I stepped out of concealment with my hands visible. Sheriff, it's Charlie. Donovan's down, threat eliminated. Anyone else hurt? Negative, clean operation, minimal collateral damage. As Sheriff Cooley approached, I realized something important. For the first time in 72 hours, I wasn't planning the next tactical move or analyzing threat assessments. It was over. My parents were gone, but their elimination had been answered. The man responsible would never threaten anyone else. Edgar's criminal organization was finished, and Felipe Donovan's 20-year conspiracy had died with him beside a warehouse in rural North Carolina. Justice wasn't always delivered through courtrooms and legal proceedings. Sometimes it came at the end of a rifle barrel wielded by someone who understood that evil unchecked would only grow stronger. Charlie, Sheriff Cooley said as EMTs began treating Edgar's men for smoke inhalation, we're going to need detailed statements about everything that happened here. Of course, Sheriff. And there's going to be a federal investigation, probably, lasting months. I understand. You realize you might face charges yourself. Vigilante justice, even justified vigilante justice, makes prosecutors nervous. I looked around the warehouse complex, smoke dissipating in the morning air, damaged buildings, Edgar's men in custody, Donovan's body covered by a medical examiner's sheet. 72 hours ago, I'd been reviewing Taliban supply routes in Afghanistan. Now, I was standing in a North Carolina warehouse, having eliminated the threat that took my parents. Sheriff, I came home to find the truth about what happened to my family. Mission accomplished. And now? I thought about Christie's green eyes, about rebuilding the farmhouse, about the difference between warfare and peace. Now I guess I figure out what comes next. The sun was rising over Millbrook County, casting long shadows across the industrial complex. Somewhere in town, Christie was probably making coffee at the diner, wondering if I'd kept my promise to come back. Sheriff Cooley was beginning the complex process of sorting through evidence and federal jurisdictions. And Edgar Aldrich was learning what happened when you chose the wrong employer for the wrong reasons. 72 hours, 30 men in a criminal organization, multiple federal crimes spanning 2 decades, more than enough time to deliver justice. The education was complete.